This is the Pastor Podcast with Randy and Andy. Andy Payton is the lead pastor at Methodist Temple United Methodist Church in Evansville, Indiana. Randy Moore is associate pastor at Methodist Temple. Their goal is to see Christ in everything and everyone.
Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I'm Pastor Randy Moore, joined as always by Pastor Andy Payton. And the summer's just flying by, huh?
I cannot believe that we're going to be starting school in like 2 weeks or whatever it is. It's just, oh my goodness.
Right.
As a parent, whew, it's a whirlwind.
There's a lot going on. And as a grandparent, 7 grandchildren, yeah. And being retired and seeing them more, which is great.
Right.
It's keeping us active as well.
Sure.
All right. So middle of the summer, we're in ordinary time and in the Gospel of Luke.
Yep.
Once again this
Working
week.
our way through Luke's Gospel.
And back-to-back stories. A week ago, I did the Good Samaritan, and then now we come up on the story of Mary and Martha, right on the heels of the Good Samaritan story. And it's interesting how those two are juxtaposed, I think. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you look at it, the big picture, you can tell that these stories have been put together in very intentional ways. Even as we think about this upcoming Sunday, the next story is about the disciples wanting to learn to pray. And so you kind of just see Luke, the gospel writer, building these stories in, just a masterful way in terms of he's got an idea in mind why they're together.
Yeah. All right, well, let's jump right in. This is Luke 10:38 to 42. Jesus visits Martha and Mary. I'll read the text for us. Now, as they went on their way, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him. She had a sister named Mary who sat at Jesus' feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks, so she came to him and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things, but few things are needed, indeed, only one. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." So I think one thing that we can say before we jump into your sermon and reflect on it is that we talked about how these two are juxtaposed, and on one level you can think, okay, this is about the difference between being active and sitting at the feet of Jesus. But it's more than that. And it's not just the answer to the Good Samaritan, which was about action, about go and do this, go and do likewise, juxtaposed against, no, sit at the feet of Jesus. It's more than that.
Oh, absolutely.
In both cases, yeah.
Yeah. I think before we get into my sermon, I guess, the one thing I'm thinking about as we're talking right now, Randy, is like, this is a reminder of why we do it to begin with.
Yeah.
It's not enough just to get busy doing a bunch of stuff. This is classic church, by the way. Like, we just get busy doing a lot of different things, and we never stop and think about, well, why are we doing this anyway? Mm-hmm. Years ago, I went to a conference. Dr. Doug Anderson led the conference, and I remember his devotion vividly because he said, "You know what the difference between energy and power is?" And then people are like, I don't even know if anyone in the group knew, but he goes, energy is just energy. It goes in a lot of different directions. But power is energy focused in a very specific way. Mm-hmm. And so I think about like this story, and then I put it with the things that have happened up to this point. And exactly that's what Jesus is trying to teach us here. It's like, don't just go get busy for busyness sake. No, remember why you do what you're doing.
There's that single focus here. She's doing the one thing.
The one thing necessary, right.
Yeah. Okay, and you started your sermon talking about truth, and that whatever's true is truth everywhere and always. You described gravity as being, having those characteristics in air and water and love, but ultimately Christ is true.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I very, very intentionally talked about love before I talked about Christ, because we live in a culture today that says essentially all you need is love, taking that from the Beatles, right? Like right. All you need is love. Well, that has become code for anything goes. Mm-hmm. Love is just, you just be okay with whatever. Not in a Christian sense, though. No, we as Christians believe love has been defined very specifically in a person, and the person, of course, is Christ. Christ defines for us what love looks like, and I would argue that the love we see in Jesus Christ is true everywhere and always.
Yeah, I really loved your description of what it means to be an inclusivist, and you brought this into your sermon. You were talking about going over to a committee meeting or being on the committee for ceremonies at UE, and the question came to you, what's the Methodist approach? And then you described how you were first an exclusivist, then a pluralist, and finally an inclusivist. And I really liked your definition of, you might want to go through all three, but really liked your definition of what it means to be an inclusivist.
Well, I mean, in many ways, I was describing my own spiritual journey to them. And by the way, before I jump into what an inclusivist is, John Wesley was an inclusivist. Mm-hmm. I'm convinced. I'm 100% convinced. I have theological papers about this. It's not just Andy saying this. It's basically this is the Methodist Wesleyan holiness tradition, is the inclusivist approach. So, let me just define them really quickly. An exclusivist, when it comes to religion, is someone that essentially is practicing their religion in such a way where it's my way or the highway. You have to believe like me, pray like me, and then that's the only way to God. That's an exclusivist, as the title suggests. On the flip side of that is a pluralist. And a pluralist has a tendency to say, well, they're all valid and equal paths. And, okay, we'll just assume that's the case. We're all just valid and equal paths. Well, then who are we to say anything? Or who are we to hold anyone accountable for anything? A pluralist to the extreme is really just a no boundaries kind of approach to life and religion in general. And the problem with that is, as you get older, you begin to realize, hey, look, wait a minute, not all these paths lead to the same destination. That's the problem overall with pluralism. And I think, honestly, Randy, pluralism creates a lot of anxiety, by the way. I want you just to think about it in terms of, imagine if you're a young person, you've never had any experience with religion or anything like that. And you show up to this thing called life one day when you're in your early 20s, and you say, okay, which path should I take? And the culture says, it's up to you.
Right.
All paths are equally valid and the same. Mm-hmm. Boy, that's a tough spot to be in. I have to wonder if we have a crisis of meaning in some ways in our current pluralistic culture. Any case. The middle road between exclusivism and pluralism is what we call inclusivism. Now, what does inclusivism say? Well, the inclusivists would say that the Holy Spirit is working in every man, woman, and child, everywhere and always, seeking to get them to respond to the person of Jesus Christ. And here's the catch. Even if they don't name it as such. Mm-hmm. All right? So there are people out there who do not identify as Christians, but they are living their lives in Christ-like ways, even though they don't identify that as such. Mm-hmm. And an inclusivist Christian then is open to the possibility that, hey, I'll work alongside a Muslim, for example. We're serving the poor. Okay, great. Let's do that. That's a very Christ-like thing to do. I'll work alongside someone from more of a Jewish background, a Jew, and let's work towards reconciliation. That's great. That's a Christ-like thing to do. I'll work alongside an atheist who's concerned, let's say, about the state of the environment, social justice in terms of the environment. That seems like a Christ-like thing to do. Okay, great. It's not saying that every path is equally valid, though. I mean, there are some guardrails. If it's not Christ-like, then no, absolutely not. We don't do that. So now, even as I say these things, there's going to be someone who likely is coming from that more exclusivistic kind of background. They're thinking, well, what's the biblical support for this kind of thinking, right? And I didn't have much time to get into this in my sermon, but one of the places I would start with, if you're kind of wondering about the biblical support, would be, a great example would be Colossians chapter 1. And in Colossians chapter 1, what we find is the author says that Jesus Christ is the firstborn of all creation. So even before Adam, even before Eve, Jesus Christ is the firstborn of all creation. What do we mean by that? Well, I think what the writer of Colossians is trying to get at here is essentially what he's saying is the fingerprint of Christ is on all things. And if you read on and just read through chapter 1, you'll see it says all things were created by him, Jesus, for him, and in him all things hold together. And so it's this idea that our lives are formed and fashioned in such a way where our relationships are meant to work in a Christ-like way, regardless of if we name it as such. Now, okay, that's kind of a pragmatic thing, right? What do we do in terms of the afterlife? Someone's going to say, well, if you don't confess Jesus Christ as Lord, if you don't pray the sinner's prayer, then you're not going to heaven. So, someone's going to say, well, that's great, Andy. I see what you're saying with the Christ-like thing in our relationships. What does that mean, though, for the afterlife? And that's a great question, by the way. Here's the place Wesley would go. He would point to, there's a story in Acts chapter 10 where the guy's name is Cornelius, and they have this encounter with this Gentile man named Cornelius, and I think it's Acts chapter 10, verse 35, I'm pretty sure, where the line is, God accepts everyone who fears him and does what is right. So there's going to be some people who the light that they've been given, religiously speaking, is not going to be the Christian light, so to speak. But as long as they are fear him, respect God, and they're seeking to do what is right, God deems that as acceptable or enough. And John Wesley, he picked up on that actually in his notes and kind of said, he alluded to Muslims and Jews. He said, well, God's a just God. The creator of the universe is a just creator and is going to hold people to the light that they've been given. And ultimately for Wesley, Christ is the pinnacle of the revelation of who God is. And Wesley would say, if that's true, then of course God's going to accept someone that, they don't necessarily see it the same way, but they are seeking in their own heart to do that which is right. God will honor that. A quick example would be all the people in the Old Testament. We as Christians, we did not get rid of the Old Testament. The prime example would be Abraham, right? So in the writings of Paul, Romans, I find it fascinating. Paul uses Abraham as the example of what it means to have justification or faith, like justifying faith. Abraham never knew who Jesus was. Abraham never confessed Jesus as Lord. None of that, no. But yet, his faith was reckoned to him as righteousness, as Paul would say. And so that same principle has to apply, in my opinion, up to the present, because God's the same yesterday, today, and forever. God doesn't change. God's always the same. And so, anyway, these kinds of things I would throw out there in terms of a basis for an inclusivist approach to faith. Just to be clear, though, Jesus is the criteria by which God judges, but there is an opening for people outside of the Christian fold.
Very good. I like that a lot. All right. You said that Christ is true, and we see that truth in our words and in our actions, hopefully. And you did something brilliant was you took what everybody was thinking about to the degree that I was amazed at, this Coldplay Kiss Cam incident, and you applied it to the point that you were trying to make. And I'll just say, first of all, I'm shocked at how that is dominating people. It's dominating social media to the degree that I never thought that it would.
It's surprising, isn't it?
Yeah.
What is it about this moment where it just captured the imaginations of people? I will say the guy that got Coldplayed in this instance, his apology, less than authentic. I
tried to blame Coldplay for it.
But, That's just, I'm like, dude, you're digging yourself a hole, man. You're just digging the ditch, man. But anyway, so yeah, is Christ true in terms of our actions? Well, look at this instance of the Coldplay concert, right? Where the band Coldplay's touring, they're doing the Kiss Cam thing in the crowd. The camera comes up on a couple. They look like a nice enough couple. The moment the guy sees that he's on camera, he bounces out of the, he just falls down and hides. And turns out, this guy's standing there with someone that's not his wife. And he's also like a CEO of a big tech company. And he's got a family. He's got a spouse. And he's there essentially cheating on his wife. And I just find it interesting, like that in an Adam and Eve type fashion, the moment he is seen, he hides, right? I mean, that's the story of Adam and Eve. Don't go eat that apple, right? Don't go do that. And the moment they do that, they hide themselves. I mean, it's just a perfect, in terms of its symbolism, that story is, and there it is on full display. I mean, we can try to live in ways other than the Christ-like way, sure, but we pay the price for it, especially when the camera's on us. Right. Yeah, and then the flip side, I used a story from our church where a group of us guys helped just to kind of put, that's a negative example, right? I mean, a positive example would be we helped a lady clean up her, had a big tree fall down in her yard. We helped her clean it up, and there's so much joy and purpose in that. And so whenever you're living against the grain of Christ-like life, you try to hide from the camera, but whenever you're going with the grain, you don't do it for like the attention, but there's joy in that because that's the way we've been created to live and be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we see this in our words and in our deeds, but your main point was, I think, that more than that, we see it in our attitudes, and this is where you brought in Martha.
Yeah, Martha invites Jesus into her home, gets busy making him a meal, gets frustrated with her sister for not helping her out. It's a famous story. And people really struggle with this story because it seems like Martha's doing the right thing.
And she is, but it's her attitude.
She's critically so, right? Yeah. She has such a critical spirit about it. And, and so even to the point where she's fine telling Jesus what to do, right? Okay, Martha, and I think that's such a vivid example, I think, of really what happens within the Christian life. Just think about it symbolically. We invite Jesus into our home. Our home in this case would be our own lives. Okay, Christ, I want you to come into my life. And then what happens? Well, we get worried and distracted by many things. And then what happens? Well, if we're not careful, we lose that sense about why we're doing it. And then if we're not careful, what happens is we begin to become critical of others, because we're going against the grain in terms of our own heart set now. And there's always this danger within Christianity that would happen. You can say the right thing. You can be doing the right thing. But if you're saying it and doing it with the wrong attitude, then it won't work. You have to adopt a kind of a Christ-like heart set as well. And now we've entered the realm of what we call sanctifying grace. And what sanctifying grace says is it's one thing to know consciously the right thing to do. And here's the catch, and do it, right? So you can know the right thing and do it. But if your honest to God desire is not to do it, you're just forcing yourself to do it, that friction in and of itself will lead to spiritual burnout. And this is why in the Methodist Wesleyan tradition, there's been such an emphasis on what we call sanctifying grace. And what is that? It's where our desires begin to align with God's desires, and we start saying the right things, doing the right things, not because we have to, but because we want to. Mm-hmm. That's the one that's got to the place where it's a joy now to be a Christian. It's a joy. And I think a lot about, Randy, how to emphasize that enough in terms of the life of the Christian journey, the Christian life. Because I fear sometimes, especially in mainline Protestantism, especially in this culture of the Protestant work ethic, where we're based, so much of our life is based upon that performance principle. Without that emphasis on the transformation of our hearts, essentially what will happen over time is we just burn out. Mm-hmm. or we keep doing the things that we think we're supposed to be doing, but then we get grouchy. And that does not help the mission of the church. People miserable to be Christian, right? So anyway, yeah.
Well, we're in chapter 10 of Luke, and you backed up. This is in the latter part, but you backed up to think about how Jesus sent out his disciples as sheep into the midst of wolves. And then we've already talked about the preceding story of the Good Samaritan, which is about going the second mile. And then you asked, what does it mean for us at Methodist Temple to go that second mile?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but then to go the second mile because our hearts have been transformed. Mm-hmm. That's the catch. Yeah, yeah. Going the second mile within your own strength, that's a one-way, that's a recipe for burnout. Yeah. Going as a sheep in the midst of a world of wolves with your own strength is a one-way track to burnout. Or I mean, even worse, you just become angry and bitter. And so...
And you picked on yourself. You talked about having your truck break down and the attitude that...
Oh, it's awful. I ruined my day. Last week I turned my truck on and it doesn't work and everything starts blinking and there's electrical issues. I'm like, what the heck, and ruined my day. And, this week I traded the truck off. I'm done with it, but there's no reason to be angry about it. Just move on, Uh-huh. And, so there's this idea in our culture today, Randy, just to kind of put all this aside for a moment, where I think the myth is, if I'm successful, I'll be happy. Mm-hmm. But that's a myth. Because once you get to that, if you've ever been successful at something, you get to that point and you're successful and you find at that moment, wait a minute, this did not lead to the happiness I was searching for. So then the goal line moves and you start doing it again. Mm. And then let's say you make the next goal. And then you get there and you look around, you're like, well, this did not lead to the happiness I hoped for. Mm-hmm. And so there's been a lot of research done now where it's not I become successful and then I'll be happy. It's kind of the flip. When I'm happy, then I become successful. When my heart is in the right place, then things begin to work in the right direction. And so now, the question becomes then, what happens when you experience unjust suffering in your life? Am I saying, you should just be happy about it? No. I mean, I don't think we are called to be happy about unjust suffering or evil or sin in the world. We're not called to be happy about those things. But even then, the most powerful response we can give to it is that our heart is oriented in such a way where we look at something like that and we think, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to allow that to steal my joy. I'm not going to allow that to take away my sense of happiness. I think this is an important nuance to make when it comes to the Christian life is the Christian life is not about living a Christ-like life in order to avoid suffering or struggles. Rather, the Christian life is about the attitude we adopt in the midst of the suffering and struggles. And I think the Holy Spirit is here to help us with that. The Spirit reminds us of, to use the words of Jesus in our parable today or our story today, the one thing that will not be taken is this eternal presence of God, the eternal love of God. I can find myself in the midst of struggling when I'm oriented in that and say, this is not going to last. This is not the end of my story. I can still be happy in God, even in the midst of this challenge. I don't think we can do that under our own strength. I think we need the Spirit in our life to do that, but I think that's the goal.
Yeah. And you savored the end of a book by E. Stanley Jones, trying to delay as long as you could finishing it up because you didn't want to be.
I didn't want it to end.
Done with it, but there was a nice quote that came out of that.
Yeah, he said that the thing that the modern person needs the most is not self-realization, and he talks about in the book how, in the modern context, we emphasize, this idea of focusing on ourselves, and what Jones says is that only leads to more of a depleted spirit because it's ourselves. It's getting what we want. It's focusing on our problems and then responding to the problems, and it goes on and on. Instead of self-realization, what Jones says is we need what he called Christ realization, which is an awareness of Christ's presence in our life, really. And so he then goes on to say, at conversion, it's like we get the Spirit, but as we grow, it's the Spirit that has us. And so now we're getting to this idea of sanctification.
You describe the difference between ego and soul as well.
Yeah. Man, you took good notes, Randy. Yeah. To use an analogy, ego as an acronym can stand for edging God out. You know, when we are oriented by our wants, our desires, our wishes, our hopes, we're edging God out because we're saying we want what we want. Like Martha in the story, right? She wants what she wants, and she's fine with telling God, Jesus, this is what you should do. That's ego. Soul says, I'm going to surrender. Soul as an acronym, surrender ourselves unto the Lord. So instead of ego, we need soul. And I have to say, from my own experience, that's the way to go. I've tried the alternative. We all have, right? Yeah. My truck breaks down. What does it look like to surrender unto the Lord? Well, number one, to realize it's just a truck. And to adopt a Christ-like attitude, even as I respond to the problem. So, yeah.
And then finally, you challenge the congregation to check our heart closets and be intentional about our words, our actions, and especially our attitudes.
Yeah. So the next story that we're coming up with next week, this coming Sunday, is just after this. The disciples go to Jesus and they say, "Hey, Jesus, teach us how to pray." And then we get the Luke's gospel version of the Lord's Prayer. And then we get a parable about being persistent in our prayers. And then at the end of the lesson, we get the promise that God wants to give us the Holy Spirit more than anything else, which is a perfect segue out of this conversation we've had in Luke 10. Next week's lesson comes from Luke 11, but you can just see the gospel writer Luke is just building his stories in a specific way. And what we find, I think, in Jesus' lesson on prayer in Luke 11 is that we're persistent in our prayer, not because it changes God's mind, but we're persistent in our prayer because it changes our minds and our hearts. That's why we're persistent. And I think that's what that promise of the Holy Spirit really points to. And so the Lord's Prayer, if you just take it down line by line, gives us a really great picture about the desires that we should have in terms of our spiritual lives.
Very good. That's this Sunday. We'll look forward to that. You're welcome to join us here at Methodist Temple. We worship traditionally at 8:30, and then our contemporary services at 11. You can also worship with us online. You can worship virtually, and we just appreciate the fact that you listen to our podcast. Thank you for doing that. Pray you have a great week, and we'll talk to you again next week.
This has been the Pastor Podcast with Randy and Andy. You are welcome to join us at Methodist Temple in person or online. Methodist Temple is at 2109 Lincoln Avenue in Evansville, Indiana. Our traditional Sunday morning worship service is at 8:30 with our contemporary service at 11. Log on to our website at methodisttemple.church. We see Christ in you.